Been talking to my imaginary friend.
Most important challenge, that rift. T-Bone comes to me after I get elected and says to me, Cory, can we go for a ride? And I say, T-Bone, your car or mine? And I very nervously get into his car. And we drive off of Martin Luther King Boulevard up South Orange Avenue. And South Orange Avenue is one of the stranger streets in America. Because as soon as you punch out of Newark, it's suddenly like going in the Wizard of Oz, from black and white to Technicolor. And suddenly there's these huge homes. In fact, children from Newark's parents who live just maybe 100 yards away, sometimes they'll use false addresses in South Orange or Montclair to sneak their children into the better schools. And those towns have people that follow around these minority children to see where they're going home, and then we'll remove them, send them back to Newark schools, and bill them for the tuition for the time that they took them there. This is a wonderful country we live in. And so we drove into South Orange, and we pull over to the side of the road, and I sit there, and T-Bone tells me, you got to get me out of here. And I'm like, okay, T-Bone, I got some programs, some plans. You see, we at that point had gotten the drug dealers away from the front of the building. We at that point had gotten the slumlord convicted in federal court. Ms. Jones danced that day. We got the local school adopted by Prudential. We now have a health center there. We got the crack house torn down. And now here's T-Bone, to me, feeling incredibly confident. He says to me, you got to help me get out of here. And I'm like, T-Bone, I got some programs, some plans. I know some things we can do. He goes, you don't understand something. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, and he basically explains to me that he has warrants out for his arrest and that they're closing in on him. And I hadn't seen him for a few weeks, and I'm now listening to him tell me this story. And suddenly T-Bone starts telling me his story, which again is the same story for the first 12 years or so of my dad's first 12 years. Born to a single mother, born poor. My father used to say, I can't afford to be, when I was young, I couldn't afford to be poor. I was just PO, P-O. The other two letters, couldn't afford them yet. Same thing. Him and his mother had him. Mother couldn't take care of him. My grandmother, biological grandmother, couldn't take care of my dad. They both were taken into the community. The community that absorbed T-Bone was a community of gang members. And T-Bone's life spiraled down from there. Here he's telling me this story about his childhood, going through it in detail, and I'm not hearing him anymore. I'm looking at my dad, a guy who's evidenced more genius than me, a guy that was controlling a business, probably making more revenue than I'll ever control in a business. And sitting there looking at each other, he's telling me the story, I'm off thinking about my dad and how that this glorious movement, the civil rights movement that began to make real on the American promise, had gotten twisted to the point that there we were sitting there, two young black men sitting there looking at each other. And I began to think to myself, you know what, this guy looks like me. This guy could be my dad. And suddenly he looks at me, snapping me back to focus with the same ferocity with which he threatened my life. Same ferocity. And then he says to me, and he bursts into tears and starts crying, this powerful, macho, young black male sobbing into my dashboard. And then Barbara Jordan came back to me, because the rest of the quote there is simple. She says, we live in a distraught present. Though we've had the courage to deplore it, we've failed to heal the rift that exists between the middle-class black lawyer and the urban dweller. That rift between me and T-Bone was inches. We sat there, but I felt so alienated that there was a gulf as wide as the Grand Canyon between us, and I could not reach out to save this young man. We drove back down to Brick Towers. He got out of the car, and I've never seen him again since that day. He disappeared into the streets.